皆さん、こんにちは。それでは、セッション3の3、専門家と専門組織の役割を開始したいと思います。私は、共同
Hello, everyone. I am co-chair. My name is Takamura from Nagasaki University. I will co-chair for the first three presentations, and then I'll hand over to Mr. Jean-Christophe Gariel from IRSSN. First, we have from Professor Orita of Nagasaki University. She will talk about risk communication for health effect of radiation exposure with residents in Tomioka town. Hello, I am Makiko Orita from Nagasaki University. Thank you for this opportunity. I am going to talk about the risk communication for health effect of radiation exposure with residents in Tomioka town. Right now, Nagasaki University is conducting has an office in Kawauchi and Tomioka town. From this year, we also set up an office in Okuma town. Tomioka town used to have 16,000 people, and it was a main town with commercial facilities. And Tomioka town is 15 kilometers from the plant, and people had to evacuate right after the accident. However, in 2016, the evacuation order was lifted, except for difficult to return area, and the town office also returned. After the accident, many local residents had anxieties about health effect of radiation because the risk communication was not conducted. In Tomioka town, there was risk communication, or there needs to be a risk communication and dialogue. This shows the changes in ambient dose rate in Tomioka. The dose rate is relatively high in yellow, and dark blue is relatively low. And you can see that the dose fell. Right now, the average dose rate is 0.1 to 0.2 microsievert. Tomioka town is right now going through reconstruction efforts. JR Joban Line, Tomioka Station has been reopened. It suffered from earthquake and tsunami and nuclear power accident. Tomioka town was damaged by the tsunami. 2 years after the damage, you can still see the damages of tsunami. But as you can see, the station was a place to store the decontaminated soil. But now there is a new JR station. From Tokyo Station, you can go directly to Tomioka without changing trains. Tomioka is famous for cherry blossoms. There's a cherry blossom street. However, part of the street is designated as difficult to return area. However, part of the street has reopened, and now we can use this road partly. So infrastructure rebuilding is going on. Now, if you look at the residents, they have different feelings. In 2016, the government conducted an interview, and 16% of the residents wish to return, and 25% said they don't know, and 58% said they don't want to return. The reason for not returning is that they have new job at other places and educational facilities, and they've now resettled in some other place. And also there's still one concern over radiation. Nagasaki University, using its experience in Kawauchi town, we have set up promotion base in Tomioka town. We concluded agreement in 2017 and we started our activity there. Our activity includes the evaluation of effectiveness of decontamination and evaluation of risks of internal exposure. And we have health consultation with inhabitants. So our activity includes individual consultation at the city office and also visiting the residents and explaining the data to residents. Nagasaki University, based on objective data and telling the residents of the result is important. There is one resident who is about 70 years old. He wanted to return to the Tomioka and he was allowed to go back to Tomioka occasionally. So he started to clean up his house. But to his surprise, every time he returned to Tomioka, the air dose, individual dose, he measured. And we analyzed this data with the chronological order. He stayed longer in Tomioka. However, air dose has reduced. So although he's staying in Tomioka longer, the exposure is less. So his exposure is between 1 to 2 millisievert per year. So there's no effect on his health. We explained this to him and he was very happy. So objective valuation and explaining that to residents will be helpful in making them return to the town. And we also have small group meetings. We exchange views on radiation and also we hear about how they are doing because they already returned to the town. So this is what we tell them in dialogue. Residents are worried about food safety. So we took some food samples from the town and we explained it to the residents. So the food that we bought at the supermarket never exceeded the standard but the residents, sometimes they have their own gardens. Tomioka city office, they have a measurement dosimeter and residents are free to use this dosimeter. So there is now a culture of measuring the food dose and then if you find safe, you eat it. This is the concentration of radiocesium in each sample. Most of vegetables and potatoes, we did not find anything that exceeded the standard. However, with wild plants and mushroom, we could find some that are above the standards. But even if people eat these plants or mushrooms above the standard, it will not affect them. But now the residents understand that wild plants and mushrooms tend to have higher standards. And some residents are worried about taking in mushrooms. And we tell them that internal radiation, we tell them about the internal radiation. So not just the concentration, but the volume of food intake is also important. That's what we tell the residents. So these are some of the topics and comments that we got at small group meetings. They doubt that the standard value of radionuclide concentration in food has suddenly changed from 500 to 100 becquerels. This is a question that we often get. Standard value was decided based on the guideline of radiation protection considerations, but the residents have not really understood this. We are often giving this question too. They say they are sad and anxious because their neighbors have not returned. And some residents say that they do not trust the town's administration office and authorities. In small group meetings, we have the government or the municipal's administration people to participate, and they also answer the questions. So this kind of group that is participated both by residents and administration is important. So also, we have classroom for Tomioka Junior High School. These students ask what was the radiation level at the time of accident, and they ask about how the families were worried at the time of accidents. So we talk with students and experts in Japan and abroad, and it's important to tell the people about what really happened. Now, we will engage in activities to tell them about the lessons that we learned. The challenges for the future are the people who are still evacuated, and also to engage in the radiation protection dialogues. Have held activities towards the junior high school students and residents. In a sports event that was held in Tomioka, we had some occasions to talk with residents who are still evacuated. Some of these people still have concerns about radiation. So we hope we can interact with these people who are still evacuated. Now, this is the conclusion. Dose assessment is an important first step for radiation health risk communication. In the restoration period, it's important to have a dialogue with local residents and stakeholders. We believe that our approaches that focus on collaboration in stakeholders is important. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Orita. So you talked about the support in Tomioka town. There are two questions. It's in the Q&A site. I hope you'll answer them later on. Now we go on to the next speaker. From Kindai University, we have Professor Yamanishi to talk about support activities for measuring the doses to children in Kawamata-machi.
I am Yamanishi from Kindai University. I'll be talking about the support activities for measuring the dose of children in Kawamata-machi. This is the contents. I will introduce the Kindai University, then the Kawamata-machi, and the measurement of personal doses. the factors of success and acknowledgement. Kinda University was established in 1949. It is a private university. It has 6 campuses in Western Japan. The headquarters is in Higashi Osaka City. For 7 years in a row, it had the largest number of applicants, so it is the most popular university in Japan. The 6 campuses are in Western Japan. We have a 1-watt nuclear reactor for educational research. This is the first private sector university-owned reactor, and it is used for nuclear science education. This character is the mascot for Atomic Energy Research Institute. His name is 1-watt. After the accident, the radioactive materials were released, and the area dose at the time looked like this. Here is the Kawamata Machi, and here is 1F. This is the 20-kilometer radius. It is the off-limits area. Outside of the 20-kilometer radius is a planned evacuation area, which was established in April 22nd, 2011. This is outside of the 20-kilometer radius, and the yearly expected dose was more than 20 millisievert per year. The Yamakiya district is located in the southeast part of Kawamata Machi, and it was also designated as a planned evacuation area. The Kawamata Machi is located 30 kilometers northwest of a nuclear power plant. It has a population about 15,000. Power plant is not located in Kawamachi, so it used to be had nothing to do with nuclear disasters previously. In March, the town accepted evacuees from Namie. Yamakiya district makes up 80% of the city's population, but was designated as a planned evacuation area. In the Yamamata, they took actively measured data, and there was leadership from the mayor and the superintendent of education. As for Kinda University's support for restoration, the director of Atomic Energy Research Institute, he was a member of Atomic Energy Society of Japan, and we also had a sense of mission as a university with a reactor. In late March, we began telephone consultation hotline was opened to measure the health effects from radiation, and we received about 75 calls for 10 days after March 24th. In early April, we received information that Mayor of Kawamata was looking for experts on nuclear radiation. And in response, on April the 30th, we visited Kawamata. We began research on radiation dose and contamination levels. After the first visit, we made analysis of the measured data and shared the results with the Kawamata as experts. We advised the schools to how to remove topsoil, how to use masks, and told them that they could open their windows during class. And we also measured radioactive materials in the school swimming pool. We also did measurements of various samples. And through this, we built a relationship of trust. And on June 21st, we were designated as a disaster recovery advisor. The Kinda University, we collected donations from faculty members. The total amount collected was 200 million yen. And using this amount, we promoted recovery efforts. From 2012, we began a project, the All-Kindai Recovery Support Project for Kawamata, which is now continuing. And this project supports decontamination, as well as mental and physical care, and reconstruction and industrial promotion. This is the basic policy for our support activities. We discuss with the municipalities and implement what is requested. And we try to build a strong relationship of trust, and all the data obtained belongs to the municipality, and any publication is required for prior approval. And we were trying to support them so that this Kawamata would become a model case in recovery that could be used across whole of the Fukushima prefecture. This is part of our efforts in respect to radiation. First of all, we measure environmental radiation. Secondly, we donate measuring instruments, and also we organize lectures. And I will now be talking about the use of glass badge personal dosimeter, which falls under the category B. So this is the main part of my report, our support for personal dosimeter monitoring for children. In May 2011, we received a consultation from the Kawamata about their concern for exposure to children. And Kindai University, using glass badge personal dosimeter, we proposed that they measure the personal exposure levels of children. And Kindai University also began services for measuring radiation dose with the dosimeter, which began in June 2011. And one cycle lasted 3 months. We made a total of 11 cycles. And at that time, it was the first time that we used the glass badge dosimeter to measure the radiation dose. So we went into nursery schools, kindergarten, primary school, the children, as well as teachers, the total of 1,700 people. All of the major results belong to the municipality. And the glass badges, as indicated in the slide, was provided by a company called Chiyoda Techno. These are the results of the measurements. We have 11 cycles in all. Each cycle lasted for 3 months. The number of people measured is as shown, and the total was 16,800 measurements. The average cumulative dose for each of the cycle was between 0.390 millisievert to 0.808 millisievert. This is the dose distribution for each cycle. This is for the first 6 cycles. In the x-axis is a dose, y-axis is a number of people. For the first cycle, the distribution is dispersed, and it has a high maximum dose. But eventually, in subsequent cycles, the peak is at the lower end, and the distribution is more concentrated. This shows the results for the 7th to 11th cycles. In the 11th cycle, most people had exposure levels of below 0.2 millisievert. This is the annual cumulative dose compared for each year. In the first year, the distribution is dispersed. But if you look at the third year, the peak is at the lower end, and it has a concentrated distribution. The maximum dose as well as mean dose has decreased. Now let's look at the trend. The x-axis is a cycle, and the y-axis is a dose per 90 days. We have taken the average values for each school, and it is decreasing. So we took average for each school, and the maximum and the minimum dose is shown here. So this has decreased for the maximum dose as well. In this measurement, through the cooperation of the schools, we had a 90% response rate. Because it was not optional, it was required for all children, we could collect municipality-wide data, which provided highly reliable data and we were able to give a sense of security. As for the success factors, first, there was a leadership of the Board of Education. The ownership of the data rested with the municipality, and the objective of the measurement was clear from the outset. And in order to help people understand the data, we provided advice when we returned the results of the analysis. And the school principals and the nurse teachers, they were important in for risk communication. We conducted briefing sessions as well as health consultation. So we did not stop with measurement. This is my conclusion. Radiation exposure suddenly became a very personal issue for the residents, and they needed information from experts in order to regain a sense of security. The Board of Education played a role to communicate information to the community. There was clear objectives. They wanted to use measurement data to regain sense of security and to communicate not just the data, but the meaning behind it. Information needed to be communicated to children and parents. And there was a relationship of trust between Board of Education, school principals, class teachers, and parents. At each stage, they could clearly understand the information. So they wanted to have the data to regain a sense of security, and our expertise were used for that. Lastly, I would like to give my thanks, especially to the stakeholders in the local schools. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Yamanishi. You spoke about the examples of the use of the personal dosimeter and the support you provided. So it's time. We would like to move on to the next presenter.
We would like to move
from
on
Hirosaki
to
University.
the doctor from the Hirosaki University. Dr. Tokonami, the floor is yours. Support activities at
presentation in this conference. My name is Shinji Tokonami, a director of Institute of Radiation Emergency Medicine, Hirosaki University. Today, I'd like to introduce our support activity for Namie Town in Fukushima after the nuclear accident. This project is still now being carried out by several departments involving not only our institute, but also Graduate School of Health Sciences or Faculty of Agriculture and Life Science, and so on. Here's the history of support activity for Namie Town. After nuclear accident occurred in March 2011, a comprehensive agreement was made between Hirosaki University and Namie Town in September. Setting up the supporting project immediately, we visited restricted areas in the town and then proposed supporting plans. Here are supporting plans. their first recovery of Namiatam, namely decontamination, promotion of renewable energy. Second,
コナミ先生申し訳ありません。よろしければスライドショーのモードにしていただけますでしょうか。
Your
Not-
slides are not on, Dr. Tomonami. Your slides are not progressing to that following pages.
これはいかがですか？
大丈夫です
How。about this, ladies and gentlemen? That's fine, sir. That's fine.
So, the second, security of and safety for residents, such as health consultation and environmental radiation monitoring. Third, accumulation of scientific findings, such as immigration of radionuclide in the environment. In 2012, local support facilities were established in Tsushima district, Namie town, which was categorized as difficult to return areas in Namie town. In 2013, headquarters office was installed in Namie town hall. Training for office workers and seminars for residents were held in radiation protection. This slide describes the characteristics of Namie town. The contamination special area was designated in 2011, where the national government implement measures for the decontamination of soil, etc. This area includes the following three zones. Zone in preparation for lifting of the evacuation order, less than 20 millisievert per year. Restricted residence area between 20 and 50 millisievert per year. Then, difficult to return zone, more than 50 millisievert per year. The national government decided to lift the evacuation order on the areas designated as both the zone in preparation, in lifting, and restricted residence area in Namie town on March 31st, 2017. This map shows the map of Namie town. Pink area and sky blue area stands for areas where returning is difficult and areas where evacuation orders have been lifted respectively. About 1,300 residents came back from their evacuation areas as of September 2020, which correspond to 6% of the total population of Namie town. In the present talk, I'd like to focus on the latest research project. The project name is Dose Estimation for Residents in Namie town. Our project is consisted of two main topics. One is for internal dose estimations, and the other one is for external dose estimations. We measured indoor and outdoor radon concentrations, cesium in river water. We measured cesium in river water and sediment, also radiocesium in the atmosphere. Regarding external dose estimation, we made a mapping of dose rate from natural and artificial gamma radiation. Also, we carried out personal dose measurement. Why is natural radiation radionuclides measurement in non-metal important? A fact is often ignored by the general public is that people were exposed to natural radiation sources before the nuclear accident, and that such exposure continues on a daily basis. We think we will use this result for the radiation risk communication to the residents in Namiya town. We hope that the residents may understand the radiation risk caused by the accident in comparison with that derived from natural radiation. Material and methods. This is for internal exposure dose survey by inhalation of radon-tolon progenies. These radioactivity concentrations were determined by passive monitors using solid-state nuclear track detectors, namely CR39. Number of houses reached 93. The measurement for 3 months was repeated 4 times in a year. The effective doses were calculated on the manner given by Anskia. Here. Here is the result of effective dose due to inhalation obtained in our survey. Table 3 summarizes indoor radon and iridium equivalent tolon concentrations. The median radon concentration and iridium equivalent tolon concentrations were estimated to be 31 and 0.7 becquerel per cubic meter, respectively. Then we calculate annual effective doses from radon and tolon progenies, as shown in Table 4. As a result, the effective dose was estimated to be 1.4 millisievert per year as a median value. It ranged from 0.7 to 5.5 millisievert per year. Regarding external dose assessment, we measured natural and artificial components of gamma dose rate separately. We used 3 inches sodium iodine scintillation spectrometer. Here is a measuring condition. This Namiya town was divided into a mesh area of 1 by 1 kilometer. In total, gamma ray pulse height distribution was obtained at 130 areas. We checked the representativeness of sample area by measuring them and several different points in the same mesh area. Here is the result. This figure shows the distribution of absorbed dose rate in air derived from natural and artificial radionuclides, respectively. We obtained 165 accessible points and 48 residential areas, excluding difficult to return areas. This left figure shows the distribution of absorbed dose rate in air from natural radiation. The right figure shows the distribution of absorbed dose rate in air from artificial radionuclides. You can see the result. The median value from derived from natural radiation is 0.034 microgray per hour. And also, on the other hand, the median value derived from artificial radionuclides is 1.1 microgray per hour. We expect these results may contribute to radiation risk communication. Not only that project I mentioned, but also other projects were being carried out. Here are a list of projects. Biological effect of radiation exposure on wildlife, Namie Town, Fukushima, and transition survey of radioactive cesium. Also, we are conducting health consultation of risk communication work for staff in Namie Town office, education program with health-related activity to prevent arteriosclerotic disease. And also we supported the children rearing community. Here is the conclusion. It is important to continue these supporting activities for the residents in collaboration with Namie Town office. We expect natural radiation exposures may help people understand the radiation risk. This is all. Thank you very much for your attention.
ありがとうございました。常成先生。特に環境放射能評価を、の評価を通じた支援活動について、発表していただきました。ですね、今、質問をですね、チャットの方に見ることができると思いますけども、山西先生、常波先生に共通するような質問として、バックグラウンドのラディエーション、バックグラウンドラディエーションですね、をどういうふうに、評価したのかというような質問が来ております。バックグラウンドラディ、いわゆるバックグラウンドの放射線について、どういうふうにして補正をしたのかということについて、山西先生、常波先生、簡単にご回答いただけますでしょうか。
はい。
はい。
山西です。すいません。近畿大学山西です。バックグラウンドの評価ということですけれども、川俣町の方では、随分と、自然のバックグラウンド、西日本でのバックグラウンドに比べると非常に高いものでしたので、生データといいますか、そういう風で扱っています。で、比較対象としてのガラスバッジのバックグラウンドデータは差し引きを行うということで差し引いております。その差し引きについては、千代田テクノールの大洗の工場の方がありますので、大洗の工場のバックグラウンドということで差し引いて評価をしております。以上です。
ありがとうございました。常波先生、いかがでしょ
う。はい、私どもの測定では、実際にバックグラウンドは自然放射線を測って、それによって差し引いていると。これはガンマ線の場合です。で、ラドンの測定結果については、ラドンを測っているということで、そのバックグラウンドそのものを評価しているということになります。
ありがとうございました。それではですね、前半3台の演題をこれで終了したいと思います。So, Dr. Gabriel, could you start the next two presentations?
Thank you very much, Dr. Professor Takamura. My name is Jean-Christophe Gariel, and I am working at the French Institute for Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety. And today it's my pleasure to co-chair this session with Professor Takamura. So I will make the next talk, and the title is The Role of Experts in Post-Accident Recovery. And it's a pre-recorded presentation. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jean-Christophe Gariel, and I'm working at IRSN in France. It's my pleasure today to make this presentation about the role of experts in post-accidental recovery. As you probably know, IRSN is a French institute in charge of assessing nuclear and radiological risks. And as such, we have the responsibility to provide expertise and recommendations in case a nuclear accident occurs. If we made and if we are still making many efforts to be prepared as much as possible to face the emergency phase and to provide expertise during this phase, it's less the case for the recovery phase and more preparedness is necessary. One of the main questions we have is, should we have, and if so, what would be our role in the affected territories during the recovery phase? Based on Chernobyl and Fukushima accident experience, we tried to answer to this question, and this presentation is aimed at providing some pieces of answer. When and where did this story start? IRSN and our colleagues from CEPN have been involved in the European Ethos and Core projects in Belarus. These projects were initiated a few years after the Chernobyl accident. One of the major findings of these two projects was about the importance of involving the population with the support of both national and local authorities and with the support of experts to ensure the effectiveness and sustainability of protection actions. Following the Fukushima accident, IRSN and CEPN had the opportunity to be involved in ICRP dialogue seminars. There were two main ideas behind this participation. The first one was to bring a testimony on the works that were performed with the population in Belarus. And the second and most important one was to learn from the Japanese experience, and in fact to see if there were differences or similarities with what was observed in Belarus. A few words about the analysis that we performed. The analysis was launched in 2013 and it lasted about 5 years. The main objective was to identify the different lessons which could be learned from these dialogues. And it was also to see how these lessons could benefit to radiological protection experts. This analysis was performed in cooperation with many Japanese stakeholders and experts that were involved in the ICRP dialogues. And it was performed through several workshops that took place both in Japan and in France. What are the major findings of this analysis? The first one is about the human dimensions of the post-accident situation. It seems quite obvious, but often radiological protection experts focuses on numbers, levels, or criteria. And in post-accidental situation, we should realize that the main objective is to bring support to affected population by listening their concerns and expectations. The second finding is about the stakeholders' engagement. It concerns authorities, affected population, and experts. The third one is about the co-expertise process that involves both affected population and experts. A consequence of this co-expertise process is the development of a practical radiological protection culture that will allow affected people to improve their radiological protection. Let's start with the human dimensions. When looking at both Fukushima and Chernobyl accident consequences, it was observed that the human consequences are quite similar. It was observed a loss of confidence in authorities and experts, a strong worry about the future, and especially about the future of children, a general feeling of helplessness and abandonment, and also a general feeling of discrimination and exclusion. From a general point of view, there is a feeling of loss of control on daily life, as all the components of this daily life are affected at the individual and at the community levels. Finally, all the individuals that are affected are permanently confronted to a very simple and difficult to answer question. If I am still on the contaminated territory, should I stay or should I leave? And if I left or if I am located, should I return or not? The second finding is about the stakeholder engagement. And in that case, there was a big difference between Belarus and Japan. In Belarus, the stakeholder involvement was mainly driven by experts coming from abroad. It was quite different in Japan, where local authorities and local communities mobilized themselves to initiate actions with the help of experts that were personally committed. Most of these experts came from universities from Japan. What is the experience feedback from these experts? First point is that each individual situation is different, and experts have to work on a case-to-case basis. The second point is about risk communication. There is a major difficulty to talk about the effects and risks associated with exposure to ionizing radiation. A major point is that experts should not easily conclude that the situation is safe. Also, experts need to be consistent with the scientific knowledge and modest with respect to the uncertainties and limits of knowledge that characterize low-dose exposure situation. Another point is that experts should consider that radiation protection is unavoidable, but that radiation protection cannot handle people's lives. So it underlines the importance of focusing on individual data and on their distribution within the community. Finally, the most important point, experts should respect the values and choices of each person that they have to support independently from their choice. Let's move to the co-expertise process. What is the co-expertise process? It aims at involving the affected population and other stakeholders in the management of the radiological situation in order to improve both the protection of affected people and their living conditions. This process relies on several points. The first one is to establish places for dialogue that will allow experts to listen and discuss together with affected people about their questions, concerns, but also expectations. It's not a top-down process, but really a bottom-up process. The second point is the possibility to have a joint assessment conducted by local actors and experts on the radiological situation of the people and their community. The third point is about the importance of means to measure and characterize the radiological situation. Then, once the radiological situation is established, the next step is about the implementation of projects to address the problems that were identified at the individual and community levels with the support of local professionals, experts, and authorities. In an initial phase, this project will address issues that are related to radiological protection. And as time goes, these projects will focus on the improvement of living conditions of affected people. The last point is about the development of the practical radiological protection culture. As it was observed in Belarus, the Fukushima experience has confirmed that the co-expertise process was quite effective to develop a practical radiological protection culture among the affected people. And this culture will allow the affected individuals to gain autonomy. It will allow first to interpret results of measurements such as ambient levels or external and internal doses. It will allow individuals to build their own benchmarks against radioactivity in daily lives. And finally, with this culture, they will be able to make their own decisions and to protect themselves and their relatives. It introduces the notion of self-help protection. Obviously, in this approach, access to individual measurements by the people with suitable devices is quite critical. However, recent technology allows to provide measurement devices that are cheap and friendly user. To summarize this talk, I would insist on 3 points. First, the co-expertise process is key to regain trust between authorities and experts and inhabitants. Second point is that to be helpful, and that's what we want, scientists need to understand that as necessary as radiation protection is, it's not the only problem inhabitants are facing, and it cannot handle people's lives. And finally, and this is the most important point to my mind, it must be at the service of individuals and of the community. It must help them to make their own choice. Thank you very much. Okay, so we just had a general presentation about the role of experts in post-accidental recovery. And the next presentation will focus on a special case, and it's a presentation by Dr. Skutterud from the Norwegian Radiation and Nuclear Safety Authority, and he will talk about the experience of Norway following the Chernobyl accident.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first of all, I must thank the conference organizers for inviting us to present experiences from the nearly 35 years of post-Chernobyl management in Norway. And I cannot talk about our experiences without giving you a brief introduction to the consequences of the Chernobyl fallout in Norway. The fallout was not high enough to be an external dose issue, nor was it a large issue in cultivated agricultural areas. However, Norway is a mountainous country with only about 3% of the area being cultivated, and the highest Chernobyl deposition occurred in rural mountainous areas in central and southern Norway. The challenges in Norway has therefore been related to traditional food production, utilizing unimproved forest and mountain pastures where the transfer of cesium in the food chain is high. During summer, we traditionally use this pasture for grazing of cattle, goats, and sheep, and reindeer are grazing these areas throughout the year. During spring and summer 1986, monitoring and deposition mapping gradually revealed significant contamination, and trade bans were imposed on sheep, reindeer, and freshwater fish. In July, the government passed a resolution saying no producer should suffer economically from the authorities' decisions relating to the fallout. During the autumn, as potential long-term consequences were gradually understood, maintaining livelihood and avoiding many years with condemnation of food became important. The condemnation of large quantities of foods due to the trade bans in 1986 quickly taught us that production for condemnation was extremely unsatisfactory, and it was also expensive. To limit resource use and costs, various methods were developed. The most successful and applied have been clean feeding, live monitoring, and using cesium binders to reduce levels in animals. Live monitoring is a quick method to select the least contaminated animals for slaughter, decide on clean feeding periods for the more contaminated animals, and thereby avoid condemnation. Cooperation. The countermeasures were developed in cooperation between scientists and authorities, with involvement of farmers and reindeer herders in research and development and practical implementation, etc. Later cost-benefit analysis showed condemnation was not only expensive, it was also cost inefficient compared to the other countermeasures. During autumn 86, it became evident that drastic measures were needed to save the indigenous Sami reindeer herders' lifestyle. Radiocesium concentrations in reindeer meat approached 100 times the permissible level and suggested that reindeer herding could be affected for decades. Therefore, the authorities decided to increase the maximum permissible level for radiocesium in reindeer meat from the initial value of 600 to 6,000 becquerels per kilogram. It is important to note that the limit of 6,000 applied to marketed reindeer meat and not to the meat the herders consumed themselves. The higher level was justified by the low consumption of reindeer meat by average Norwegian citizens, of about half a kilogram a year. But it required separate actions for the herders who consume up to 100 or 150 kilograms a year. The authorities prepared and distributed dietary advice, which gave information on contamination levels and consumption rates, and various methods of cooking and preparation to reduce contamination intake. A whole body monitoring program was initiated to survey doses and countermeasure efficiency. In addition, the reindeer herders were offered reindeer meat from less contaminated areas, and for many years they received compensation for extra clean feeding of animals for own consumption and compensation for purchase of alternative clean food. When dealing with various groups of affected people, we relatively early experienced that it is not a homogeneous group. They are all individuals with their own preferences, and in many cases there is no reason to expect consensus about decisions. This was also observed and described by an anthropologist who studied social consequences of Chernobyl in Norway. And she wrote, it is a lot like mercury. Wherever you touch it, it divides. When you shift the plane of an analysis, diverse groups bead together in unexpected ways. We also learned how important local, detailed monitoring results are for the local population. While, for instance, municipality average values could be satisfactory for authorities, they were not sufficient for the local people who wanted to make their own decisions. The availability of local measurements also builds local knowledge and help the population manage in their contaminated environment. Particularly, the whole body monitoring program proved to be important in Norway. While the authorities' main interest was in ingestion dose surveillance, the measurements has also proved efficient in helping the herders assess the effects of their efforts to reduce contamination intake. And the monitoring campaigns have also been useful arenas for communication with experts. The graph illustrates the ingestion dose received by reindeer herders in the most contaminated region in central Norway. The green curve shows that maximum measured levels corresponding to doses around 2 millisievert a year, while the red curve illustrates that average doses would have been around 10 millisievert a year if no actions had been taken. The red area here illustrates 25 years of continuous countermeasure efforts. Another experience was that the development of many countermeasures had the added value of giving people options, because no size fits all. People have different priorities, and voluntariness and co-determination are factors known to increase feeling of influence and control, which helps people cope with the situation. In addition, the choices were basis for building personal experience and knowledge. Our role as experts is to develop, explain, and suggest options, not to decide. On the contrary, strict management regimes with few options gave few possibilities for initiatives by the population. We have also experienced that our system of individual economic compensation based on consequences for each family or producer, not generalized based on geography, has had positive effects. Then some words on trust and commitment. Chernobyl was also a crisis of confidence in authorities in Norway. Trust must be earned, and it could take a long time. Situations with long-term contamination require long-term commitment, and it could be challenging to maintain involvement of experts when the purely scientific technical issues were solved. But local people need continued support. There will, for instance, be newcomers in an area during the years, and new generations are born. And ultimately, I think such commitments are part of our social responsibility. Today, we keep monitoring and controlling sheep and reindeer. Sheep farmers are still using salt licks with cesium binder, and each autumn 3,000 to 4,000 sheep must be clean-fed. Very few reindeer are above the maximum permitted level, which is still 3,000 becquerels per kilogram. Nevertheless, we are discussing if it is time to terminate the control program. The whole body monitoring program is continuing as long as the reindeer herders are interested in participating. We keep learning and maintain competence. And with that, I thank you for your attention and look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you to Dr. Skutterud for this nice presentation about the Norwegian experience and feedback following the Chernobyl accident. Sorry. And this presentation was interesting because it has shown the effective collaboration between authorities, scientists, and farmers. So it's time now to move to the next and last presentation of this session. And this presentation will be by Anne Nisbet. Anne Nisbet is working at Public Health England, and she will talk about the elaboration by experts of handbooks dealing with recovery management process.
Good afternoon. I'm Anne Nisbet, Radiation Recovery Lead for Public Health England. I'm based at the Centre for Radiation, Chemical and Environmental Hazards in Oxfordshire in the United Kingdom. I'm very pleased to be invited to give this presentation on the role of experts in the development of recovery handbooks. It's a topic that I've been leading on for over the last 20 years. The UK has been at the forefront of this work and has inspired other European countries to develop similar handbooks with the input from European experts. What are the recovery handbooks? Put simply, they are one of several tools that can assist in the development of strategies for managing contaminated areas following a radiation emergency. But why do we need the handbooks? Well, there are a large number of potential countermeasures or protective actions, as they are now called. And please note, for historical reasons, I will use the term countermeasure for this presentation. In fact, there are more than 100 different countermeasure options, and decision makers will need guidance on how to select countermeasures according to these various factors: the radionuclide type and form and the level of deposition, the scale and timing of release, the type of land use affected, the timescales required for countermeasure implementation, as some options need time to manufacture and prepare, and also there may be legal constraints or other constraints preventing implementation. And last but not least, we have the acceptability of the countermeasures, which is important. And of course, all these factors depend on the prevailing circumstances, and therefore it's impossible to have a generic strategy for all emergency scenarios. The audience for the recovery handbooks is many and varied. The list on the left-hand side gives some examples of who might use it. In terms of application, the handbooks have several functions. In the preparation phase, to engage with stakeholders and develop plans, both national and regional types of plans, and even plans at a local scale. And they're also very useful in identifying gaps in capability. In the post-emergency phase, handbooks are used to aid decision-making. And finally, the handbooks can be used in emergency exercises and for training purposes. In terms of content, all three handbooks more or less have the same structure and content. And by this I mean supporting information is provided on food production systems, inhabited areas and drinking water supplies. Exposure pathways, doses and radiological protection criteria are also discussed, as are principles of waste management. There's general information provided on countermeasures and factors influencing their implementation, as well as detailed information on more than 100 countermeasures recorded in the form of data sheets. There's also a decision-aiding framework to select and combine countermeasures and to build the recovery strategy. And last but not least, worked examples of how to use the decision-aiding framework, and the data sheets are presented. This is the timeline that I will keep referring to during this presentation. It shows the history of involving experts in the collection of data and information to support the development of recovery handbooks. Looking down the timeline, you will see that the recovery handbooks did not exist until 2005, when the first version of the UK handbook was published. This is almost 20 years after the Chernobyl accident, so why did it take so long? Well, basically, it took time for us scientists to understand the behaviour of different radionuclides in different environments and how we could apply this knowledge to prevent or reduce radionuclide transfer. We will start by looking at the period 1990 to 2000. During this period, the European Commission allocated hundreds of millions of euro in its third and fourth framework programmes, as well as its targeted EC-CIS experimental and joint studies projects. Numerous scientists and technical experts from research organisations, radiation protection institutes and academia worked on these projects to collectively produce data and information on the range of topics shown here on the right-hand side. The results have been written up for publication in hundreds, if not thousands, of technical reports, peer-reviewed papers, presented at international conferences and symposia. And of particular interest in the context of recovery handbooks is the research on the effectiveness of agricultural countermeasures and the effectiveness of decontamination options in inhabited areas. The next period I would like us to focus on is 1993 to 1997. This is a time when the UK expanded both the diversity of experts and the topics that needed to be considered for the successful management of contaminated areas. During this time, in 1993, PHE, or as we were known then, the National Radiological Protection Board, were commissioned by the UK government to investigate the applicability to the UK of agricultural countermeasures that have been used in CIS countries. To do this, we needed to broaden the topics of interest by including the availability of resources and costs, the acceptability of the countermeasures, and their effectiveness under UK conditions. This is the first time these additional aspects had been evaluated. We used a questionnaire approach, and then we followed this up with face-to-face discussions with our experts. And the type of experts that we included are shown on the right-hand side. The output of our study was a report containing a series of conclusions and recommendations to UK government. The first conclusion and recommendation, the final conclusion and recommendation, is shown here. The use of expert judgment to gauge the practicability of countermeasures was useful, but also highlighted considerable divergence of opinion. Contingency plans should therefore include the establishment of an expert working group involving the relevant government departments, representatives from the farming community, and other specialists. So this is exactly what we did. We called our new expert group the Agriculture and Food Countermeasures Working Group. It was established in 1997, jointly by me at the NRPB and colleagues at the Ministry of Agriculture. The aim of this expert group was fourfold: to encourage communication between experts, to disseminate relevant information, to debate the practicability of protective actions or countermeasures for planning purposes, and to provide expert engagement during a radiation emergency. The range of government and non-government experts is shown on the right-hand side, and this group was very active from 1997 to 2009. There were several notable outputs from the expert group. The report shown here summarises the work of the group in its first 4 years. The group also provided a role model for the subsequent establishment of other European expert groups via the Farming Network 2000 to 2004, which I had the opportunity to coordinate. And the group also provided a vital input over the years to the development not only of the first version of the UK Recovery Handbook for Radiation Incidents in 2005, but also subsequent updates. The next period I would like to focus on is 2000 to 2009. This is a very important time for the development of the recovery handbooks at the European level. Without the financial support from the European Commission 5th and 6th framework programmes, it would not have been possible to undertake the farming, strategy and Uranus projects, which were fundamental to handbook development. The involvement of experts at the European level saw a further broadening in the focus from agriculture and food to inhabited areas and drinking water supplies. There were a number of initiatives that were taken to engage with the experts, and these are shown here. For example, the establishment of international working groups, leading, for example, to the compilation of compendia of countermeasure data sheets, which were, of course, the precursor to the handbooks. There were opportunities for brainstorming on the structure and content of the handbooks, as well as the establishment of handbook user groups to allow for continual improvement to the handbooks. There were also national working groups and subgroups established to develop recovery plans at the national level, as well as scenario-focused workshops and participation in national and international exercises. A wide range of experts were engaged, encompassing multiple disciplines, and examples of these are seen on the right-hand side. This slide gives a summary of the main points so far. It shows how the UK Recovery Handbook version 1 and the UK Agriculture and Food Countermeasures Working Group were useful prototypes for wider application in Europe through the application of experts in the farming, strategy and Uranus projects. These initiatives first led to the development of generic European handbooks and subsequently to customised handbooks in other countries, including further updates to the UK handbook. Following the Fukushima accident in 2011, a minor update to the UK Recovery Handbook, published as version 4, was released in 2015 to capture some of the learning, and at the same time, the first versions of the chemical and biological handbooks were also published. And finally, we come to the present day. Almost 10 years have passed since the Fukushima accident, and PHE has this year embarked on a major update to the UK Recovery Handbook, which will hopefully be published as version 5 in 2022. The project is not externally funded and relies on the support and goodwill of PHE and our partners, who are all subject matter experts. We hope to be able to take the time required to make significant improvements and to not be constrained by contractual deadlines. The three key objectives of the project are, firstly, to update the handbooks to reflect science, improvements in science and technical advances, to include learning from other major incidences such as Litvinenko, Salisbury and COVID. Also to take into account changes in international guidance, legislation and also national legislation, and to address emerging gaps. The last major update was in 2009, and things have significantly moved on since then. The second objective of our update is to critically review the decision-aiding framework and to extend the range of worked examples, which are currently quite limited. The third objective is to continually elicit end-user and stakeholder feedback on the handbooks and to take this into consideration before publication. PHE is currently working closely with and is reliant on experts in other government departments and agencies, as well as Sellafield Limited and local authorities. These experts are listed on the right-hand side. We are fortunate that through the UK Government Nuclear and Radiological Emergencies Recovery Working Group, we have an even wider range of experts to carry out peer review of our handbook updates. These experts are listed on the right-hand side. This is my concluding slide. Hopefully, it illustrates the crucial role played by experts over the last 30 years in the development of the recovery handbooks, based not only on UK, but also European experience. By engaging with experts, we have achieved a better understanding of the transfer of radionuclides in the environment and the role of countermeasures. We've got a better understanding of the factors influencing countermeasure implementation. We have assembled compendia of countermeasure information, and with all of this, we have been able to develop state-of-the-art recovery handbooks. Thank you very much for your attention, and please contact me if you have further questions or wish to discuss any aspects of the work.
Thank you to Dr. Nisbet for this very interesting presentation about handbooks. These handbooks are very important tools for improving preparedness, hoping that they will not be used in a real situation. So we had 6 very interesting talks that covered a large range of aspects that are related to the role of experts in the recovery management process. we started with some examples of support activities in Japan. It was in Namie, in Kawamata, and in Tomioka towns. And then we had the presentation about foreign experiences. In all cases, this session has shown the crucial and difficult role of experts in the recovery management process. So I think we are almost at the end of this session. I would like to thank the speakers. And as I think we have some remaining time, perhaps we could have a small kind of conclusion by Professor Nakamura, and perhaps we could take some questions from Japanese participants. Professor Nakamura.
Thank
Thank you very much. Just as Dr. Gallier said, the theme that is that the role of experts and expert organization for the recovery from the nuclear accident. Against this backdrop, there are many examples of Japan and the EU, and they emphasize that the experts, administrative offices, and residents, that the cooperation is a key. Well, that the risk communication and the measurement are the role of the experts. And through this, and they can extract the trust from the local bodies and the residents. I think that it would reconfirm that the importance. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Dr. Carrier.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is it okay to close the session, Dr. Carrier?
Thank you,
sir.
of experts and experts organization.
Let's close the role of experts and expert organizations, section 3-3. Thank you very much once again to the presenters and participants.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gallier, for chairing.
Thank you very much, Noboru. We had a good session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.